Hey folks, this is Kelani. Let's continue our efforts of looking through each class to see how they're shaping up as we get closer and closer to battle for Azeroth. You might not have too many things to get done in game right now, but that should leave you plenty of time to play around with various classes to see which one fits the bill for a main character next expansion. Let's continue our journey by looking over one of the oldest glass cannons in the game, the mages. Mages are fairly notorious for just being great damage dealers. At least one of their specs is usually in the top few, so there's always the potential to be one of the best DPS on your rosters. They can fling fireballs, frosty icicles, or barrages of arcane energy at their foes to deal massive amounts of damage. Well, we can't really do anything else, no healing or tanking for the mage's spec just yet, but a time-warping mage healer has been a pretty popular fan suggestion for a while now. Hint hint, wink wink Blizzard. So for now, all you have access to are DPS specs, but mages do what they do very well. As I said, one of their specs is usually top tier no matter what you're doing. Let's take a closer look at Frost mages first. Frost really hasn't changed that much from Legion going into BFA, so much so that if you were playing a Frost mage before the pre-patch, you probably won't have to change much about how you are playing. We lost Ebon Bolt and that's about it. You can even pick it back up in the talent section if you really miss it, but I don't think it's doing all that well against the other talents on the same row. So where does that leave us? Well, there's a lot of Frostbolt spam, let me put it that way. Frost is really simple in its mechanics, almost elegantly so. You cast Frostbolt until you get one of your two procs, Fingers of Frost or Brain Freeze. If you get the Fingers of Frost, you can cast a super powerful Ice Lance. If you get a Brain Freeze proc, you cast a Frostbolt, immediately cast a free instant Flurry, and follow it up with a powerful Ice Lance. And that's pretty much the basics. You also have Frozen Orb to chuck out to deal damage and help generate some more Fingers of Frost procs for those delicious Ice Lances. There's a little bit more to it when you get into the nitty gritty, but on the face of things, Frost is fairly easy to understand. It might seem boring when broken down so easily, but I think the flow of Frost is pretty great. It's also incredibly satisfying to see the huge numbers from your Ice Lance crits. Gameplay based on procs can be hit or miss though, because the majority of damage is locked behind your Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze procs. Frost is a whole lot of fun to play while you're getting your procs. If you happen to be a little unlucky and don't get many procs during an encounter, it really does devolve back down to Frostbolt spamming pretty quickly. That's obviously not going to provide you with the most exciting gameplay in the world, but when you finally do get those procs, it feels so good. So where are Frost mages doing well right now? Pretty much where they always have, single target encounters and some cleave encounters if you talent appropriately. Frost can be a single target DPS machine, it's pretty much what it's designed to do. Now when you add in the splitting ice talent, things start to get interesting. A good portion of your damage cleaves to a secondary target, so Frost will be great on single target and any encounter where they can hit a secondary target thanks to their splitting ice talent. As for AoE, well, Frost doesn't really pack much of a punch when compared to some other classes, unless there's a ridiculous amount of targets for Blizzard to hit, so 1 and 2 targets will be their specialty. So what about Dungeons and Mythic Plus? Well, their cleave should make them quite valuable for taking down trash packs quickly, and their single target damage should be pretty decent when it comes to bosses. But Frost mages bring something even more important to dungeons. They bring the most powerful AoE slow of any class. They can talent to make all of their slowing effects more effective, giving them a 65% slow which they can apply to anything and everything they desire. I think we'll see a lot of Frost mages in high-end Mythic Plus keys. Mages in general also have great mobility thanks to Shimmer. Having 2 charges on your blink is fabulous, but having a movement cooldown which doesn't even break your current cast is pretty crazy. Their barriers also provide a decent amount of extra health for any nasty AoE abilities, and if they really have to, they can always ice block, one of the few immunities available in-game. Frost mages can ice block more often thanks to Cold Snap, which makes them very useful for taking otherwise lethal hits from special mechanics in raids and dungeons. Now, Frost mages do have a few weaknesses, mainly that they're a little boring to play. Personally, I don't mind the Frost playstyle, but I know a lot of people would loathe having to just chain cast a single spell until something interesting happens. It can be quite dull, especially if you don't get any procs. That's their other weakness. You're entirely reliant on procs to do meaningful damage. That means you can go crazy one pull and be pretty worthless the next. I also mentioned their lack of AoE damage past 2 targets. Frost won't really benefit all too much, so if you have a fight with 3, 4 or 5 targets, a lot of other classes will pull pretty far ahead when compared to Frost mage's damage potential. As we did with the other classes, let's have a wee gander at the available Azerite traits to see if we can find anything remotely exciting. Here's one appropriately named Tunnel of Ice. Frostbolt increases the damage of Frostbolt, stacking up to 3 times. The effect resets if you cast Frostbolt at a different target. Perfect on those single target encounters where you can just tunnel your face off. Glacial Assault gives Flurry a 10% chance on each strike to call down a Comet of Ice to deal AoE damage. If you get some decent brain freeze procs, that could be a lot of fun to watch. And then just in case you thought this kind of effect was completely overused at this point, consuming brain freeze has a chance to make your next non-instant Flurry cast deal more damage. Add another one to the list, guys and gals. Fire is also doing pretty well for itself in the pre-patch and will be a strong DPS spec when we hit max level in BFA. The spec also hasn't really changed all that much from Legion, so both Fire and Frost should be easy to pick up for anyone who played Mage in the last expansion. Instead of flinging Frostbolts, we'll be throwing Fireballs. There's a slight difference, believe me. Fire is actually a lot more fun when compared to Frost for a variety of reasons. The first is that your major DPS cooldown sets you on fire. That's pretty awesome. It also speeds up your rotation significantly. You go from casting fireballs and some instant pyros to pyro after pyro after pyro, as long as you have some fire blast charges. It's really satisfying to just pop combustion and go absolutely ham on whenever you can see. Fire's base rotation is quite a bit more interactive when compared to Frost as well. You're still chain casting your most basic ability, in this case fireball, and you're still reliant on some procs, but you won't ever be resigned to casting 20 fireballs in a row thanks to enhanced pyrotechnics. Each fireball that doesn't crit increases the chance for your next fireball to crit by 10%, so you'll get there eventually. Even though an instant pyro needs 2 crits in a row, you usually only need the 1. You can get the second from casting Fire Blast, which you usually do while casting Fireball, to chain a fireball cast straight into an instant pyro. You end up getting more procs more often and it's a lot more fun, even while combustion is on cooldown. Fire mages are doing pretty well on single target and cleave encounters. Their single target damage has been pretty decent throughout Legion, and with nothing changing, their kit should keep them up there on the damage meters. Fire is actually getting 2 legendary effects baked into the talent section, both the Scorch Execution Belt and the Pyroblast Wrist extra damage legendaries. So even though we all say goodbye to Legion legendaries after we hit level 116, Fire mages still keep some of their strongest legendary effects. I think that's going to play a pretty big part in how Fire ends up doing at max level in battle for Azeroth. So good single target damage and great cleave damage when targets are stacked up. What makes Fire mages even stronger on cleave fights though is that they don't actually have to do anything extra to get that cleave damage. Their ignites will spread passively, so they can just pile into a priority target, and the others will take some extra damage without you even having to worry. That can end up as a bit of a problem though. Fire mages can't stop cleaving with ignite, even if they wanted to. If you ever have to stop DPS on one of the stacked targets, well, you can't. Not without stopping your DPS altogether. That would probably only end up being a problem in very niche situations, but it's still something to think about. Another pretty huge strength of Fire mages is their mobility. They still have Blink or Shimmer, which is great, but Scorch can be cast while moving. You can even talent to get some extra movement speed after casting Scorch. So if you have to move and don't have Blink available, you can still keep some damage rolling, and if you're talented for the Scorch legendary belt, while a boss is below 30% health, you'll be casting Scorch a whole bunch anyways. You're almost as mobile as a BM Hunter at that point. Fire can also kick out some great AoE DPS numbers if you swap around a few talents, which makes it a typical go-to spec for any heavy AoE encounters. The main weakness of Fire is that while its AoE and cleave are usually pretty great, it doesn't have anything to deal damage to targets which are spread apart. If your ignite can't passively jump to nearby targets, your cleave damage is neutered. If bosses are on opposite sides of the room, you're stuck to just doing single target damage. They also don't have access to Ice Block as often as Frost mages, which might limit their capability of dealing with certain mechanics, and when it comes to Dungeons and Mythic Plus, they don't offer the same crowd control options as Frost. Their damage output might be great, but in higher level keys, Frost will probably end up being preferable due to their innate ability to slow everything they damage. Apart from that, Fire mages are looking to be pretty fun and pretty strong. Let's have a look at their Azerite powers really quick. Blaster Master increases your mastery for a few seconds after you cast Fire Blast, which might seem really boring, but that's kind of cool. The main reason you'll be casting Fire Blast is to trigger an instant pyro, so that mastery bonus should always boost your next fireball and instant pyroblast. We'll see if it ends up being worthwhile, because we also have an Azerite power which gives your fireballs a chance to launch a second fireball for free. That's pretty cool. And then we also have Trailing Embers, which causes Pyroblast to burn all enemies between you and your target, which could end up being amazing in some dungeons or large trash packs in raids. Now, Arcane has actually seen some changes, but not all of them are being welcomed with open arms. Arcane Missiles has changed, which can now be used whenever you want, but it costs a boatload of mana. Thankfully, you can trigger clear casting by casting various other spells, which makes your next Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion free. The other major change is to Arcane Charges themselves. Arcane Missiles don't generate charges at all and don't benefit from any damage increase from Arcane Charges. Arcane Explosion will generate charges, but it doesn't benefit from them. So the only two spells which benefit from Arcane Charge is Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. This makes Arcane a little simpler to understand, I guess, but Arcane Missiles really doesn't feel that great to push anymore. The other thing that has changed is overall mana consumption. Everything seems a bit lower, so managing your mana could actually be a lot easier when BFA rolls around. If you thought Frost was a little tedious to play, Arcane might be a bit too spammy for your tastes. You spam Arcane Blast to deal damage, probably pushing Arcane Missiles with clear casting procs if it ends up being a damage increase by the time we hit max level, and that's about it for single target. AoE is a little more fun. You get to spam Arcane Explosion until you get 4 charges and then unleash a set of Arcane Barrages. There's not much wiggle room for changing it up while playing Arcane, but you do have the added bonus, or I guess the added annoyance, depending on how you feel about it, of actually caring about your mana. Arcane Mage is the only caster which can run out of mana, and they need to make sure they keep a healthy balance of spending mana to deal damage, and keeping enough to go crazy whenever your main cooldowns come off cooldown. Thankfully, they still get Evocation, which can restore your mana to full every 1.5 minutes. Arcane is all about cooldown management, more so than any other spec in the game. You typically aim to line up as many damage increasing cooldowns and abilities as possible to really bring the pain. I personally prefer Fire and Frost over Arcane, but if you enjoy the playstyle then have at it. Arcane has great burst damage, and that's where its main strength lies, both in terms of single target and AoE. They can absolutely destroy the damage meters while they have access to Arcane power, and however many trinkets you manage to pick up to give you an extra boost. It's really satisfying to see the huge numbers burst onto the screen as you spam Arcane Blast after Arcane Blast, but without cooldowns you really need to watch your mana and play conservatively. You need enough mana to go ham the next time Arcane power is available, so while they have great burst, their sustained damage isn't quite as reliable. Arcane should do pretty well on single target fights and very well on AoE fights with more than 4 targets, but anything in between that is kind of meh. You don't really benefit from 2 target or 3 target encounters almost anywhere near as much as any other classes or specs. Their main weakness is probably their playstyle. It just isn't for everyone. Spamming Frostbolt is bad enough, but at least there's some procs to keep things interesting. Free Arcane Missiles are nice and all, but they're not quite a Flurry Ice Lance combo. Let's go through their Azerite powers real quick to see if anything stands out. There's one which increases the damage of Arcane Missiles for every Arcane charge you have, so I guess if you miss that interaction you can still go for it. There's one which increases the damage of Arcane Blast and gives it a chance to generate a second Arcane charge, and if you were worried that your Arcane Explosion spam might not look quite as seizure-inducing without the free Echo, well, how about a chance to create an Echo of Arcane Explosion? Mages will continue to be a force to be reckoned with, as a high-powered DPS, a pastry chef, and a dealer of portal roulette. Killing people has never been so fun, but on a serious note, being able to conjure up a bunch of food and provide portals for yourselves and others will always be a good reason to pick up Mage as well. Overall, I think Mages will be in a great spot in Battle for Azeroth. They should see a good amount of play in both raids and dungeons, and right now they're actually my favourite ranged DPS. If you wanted to pick up a ranged DPS and aren't too sure what you want, you really can't go wrong with Mage. The only downside right now is that 2 specs out of the 3 won't see many changes. That means you're playing the same thing for yet another expansion. If that bothers you, try out Arcane, or maybe try playing something else for the meantime. If you love how your Mage played throughout Legion and want to continue with the same rotation and abilities, well I guess that's just another reason to stay Mage. So a Mage is worth playing in Battle for Azeroth? In my opinion, absolutely. And that's it for this video. What do you think of Mages from what you've seen so far? Will you be playing Mage in Battle for Azeroth? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you want to hop on that train, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.